Everyone, we are continuing our breaking news coverage of the Sean Grayson trial down in Peoria. We have just found out that a verdict has been reached and he has been found guilty of second-degree murder. This coming in the courtroom just minutes ago. Jury was instructed that they could either find Grayson guilty of first-degree murder, of second-degree murder, or he could be found not guilty. We are just again finding out that he has been found guilty of second-degree murder. This, of course, following the murder of Sonya Massey in her home last year, Springfield woman who called 911, and former Sangamon County Sheriff's Deputy Sean Grayson and his partner responding to that 911 call. This trial has gone on for a week. It started last Wednesday, and then yesterday is when the jury started their deliberations, just returning this afternoon with their verdict. And let's talk about this verdict and what it means. We are joined now by former federal prosecutor Chris Hotaling. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So let's talk about it. Again, the jury was instructed on three different points, either first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or, of course, not guilty. What do you think of the second-degree murder verdict?
Well, I mentioned, and you reported a few moments ago, it's not the first-degree murder conviction. It's second degree. So it's one level down from the most serious charge. But it's still a murder conviction and it will expose Officer Grayson to a fairly significant period of time in the state penitentiary.
And looking at this, second-degree murder is punishable, I'm reading here, by a term of 4 to 20 years or probation. So again, a significant amount of time he will face. Let's talk about this. Obviously, just from the outset, this trial was receiving so much media publicity. It took place in Sangamon County, but was moved to Peoria. Can you just talk about the challenge of really trying to get a very, fair trial and a verdict?
Well, certainly from the defense perspective, because, given the fact of the notoriety almost instantaneously that this case had not only in Sangamon County and in Springfield, but then really across the country. It was generating high level of attention from, certainly our state leaders, Governor Pritzker. And so from the defense perspective, they just simply felt that they couldn't get a fair trial in Springfield, in Sangamon County. And apparently the judge there agreed and felt, just because of the publicity, the notoriety, the intense feelings that this case generated with the officer shooting a woman that seemed to be in some level of distress, that felt that it was appropriate to move the case to Peoria. So that's not uncommon in hot ticket, hot button criminal cases.
And let's talk about the makeup of the jury, and it could be interesting to see if there will be any analysis on that part. 9 women, 3-man jury, 1 black person on the entire jury. Obviously they're supposed to, it's a jury of his peers, but let's talk about that as far as any concerns of reaching a verdict.
In terms of a potential legal challenge, I don't really think that there's going to be one. As the way you just described it, that I think any reasonable appellate court would look at that as being a jury of Officer Grayson's peers. Particularly given the fact that he didn't want to be tried in Springfield, and the case got moved to Peoria. It sounds like that's a pretty fair cross-representation of the populace of Peoria, and so I think he had a fair jury. That jury gave really significant time and consideration to the evidence, because we know how long that this jury deliberation process has taken, and so I think that any court that would review this would view this as being an eminently fair process for Officer Grayson.
Right, that deliberation taking a course of just more than a day. Chris, we want to put you on hold, please, if we can, because we have reporter John Garcia who has been covering this case. He is in the courthouse in Peoria. And John, I know you're running down here fresh after hearing this verdict. I'm curious to see what the flavor was like in the courtroom. I know Sean Grayson's family was there, Sonya Massey's family also present. What can you tell us?
I can tell you the courtroom was very silent as the verdict was read. It was very quick as well. Sean Grayson showed very little reaction. He stood stoically, made no comments, and shortly after about a 5-minute session in court, he held his wrists out and got handcuffed and was walked away to the jail. Again, the verdict, second-degree murder. He could have faced first-degree murder charges, but could have been convicted of that as well. The jury had that choice. Obviously, they chose to go with the lesser of the charges. He does face a potential serious amount of jail time here. The maximum penalty is 20 years for this. Had he been convicted of first-degree murder, it would have been a maximum of life in prison. So it's significantly less than some of the family and some of the protesters would have liked, but it is still a significant conviction. And I can tell you one of the protesters, in fact, they were on the corner out here. They now moved back to the corner, but right after the verdict was read, they moved to the steps of the courthouse, one of them saying, "I know it's not enough. It's better, however, than what we might have expected 10 years ago. I know the judge is going to give him 20 years when this sentencing happens." The sentencing scheduled, by the way, for the end of January. So that is where we are at right now with all of this. Back to you, Karen.
Okay, John, thank you so much. Stand by if you can. I can see right over your shoulder that there are still quite a few people out in front of that courthouse. I do have one quick question. Was there a reaction from their family, either Sean Grayson's family or Sonya Massey's family, right after the verdict?
There was no audible reaction. They made, in fact, the judge congratulated and thanked everybody before the verdict was read for their decorum in the courtroom the entire trial. He said everybody's been very well behaved and he appreciated that. And I believe that there was maybe some quiet sniffling in the courtroom, but I couldn't tell exactly where that was coming from. So it was emotional and remains very emotional, but everybody behaved in the courtroom. The protesters plan to be out here, and the Massey family is planning to speak with reporters here shortly. We're expecting also to hear from the state's attorney in just a few minutes. The family, as well as their attorneys. You know, the family has already settled out of court for $10 million in their civil suit against Sangamon County. But we will be standing by to hear from all of them shortly.
Okay, John, thanks again for that. Let's bring back Chris Hotaling, former federal prosecutor. When the trial started last week, obviously a big part of this was the body camera video that recorded the incident. And obviously with Sean Grayson taking the stand the day before the trial wrapped up, some of what he said happened did not seem to be captured on this video. You know, what can you share as far as the significance of this body cam video?
Well, I think that there were two probably critical pieces. Number one, certainly the body cam, because there's no better proof of what happens in any sort of encounter between law enforcement and the public than a body cam. It shows what happens, when it happened, who said something, who did what first, and how law enforcement reacted. So that's a critical piece of evidence. I would also add, in addition to the body cam, was the testimony of Officer Grayson's partner, who during the state's case in chief testified that in fact that he felt that the shooting was unjustified. And so that's also really significant. If the other officer on the scene is standing up and testifying for the state that based on what he saw, Officer Grayson's shooting was unjustified, that's a really powerful piece of evidence.
No, absolutely. Can you talk about the difference in the kind of sentence that a first-degree murder verdict would carry as opposed to a second-degree murder verdict?
Sure, and I think it was just reported. The first degree has the maximum potential penalty of life, whereas the second degree has a range of 4 to 20. And so what will happen is, and as we just heard, the sentencing is set for the tail end of January, I believe. And so in the interim, a report will undoubtedly be prepared for the judge's viewing, as well as for the consideration of the parties. That will be a kind of a report that kind of goes into the background of Officer Grayson, called a pre-sentence investigation report. And then the judge will use that information contained in the report, plus any and all arguments from the parties, to eventually reach on what the final sentence within that 4 to 20 range will be, given the circumstances. And it certainly sounds like the family wants a 20-year sentence. I think that's certainly within the realm of possibility here, given what happened and the circumstances of the case.
Chris, do you think the move to Peoria impacted the verdict in this case?
It's an interesting question. If this were to have been tried in Sangamon County, given that's really where the crux of the action took place, I think we could certainly have seen a first-degree murder conviction. I'm not sure we'll ever know for certain, because usually sometimes jurors talk, but a lot of times they don't. It would always be interesting to get into their heads and figure out kind of why it was that they felt that the second degree was appropriate as opposed to the first degree. But I think the change in venue and being a distance from where the action actually took place could have had an impact on how this jury eventually reached its verdict of second degree.
How often do high-profile cases actually change venues, move out of the jurisdiction of where the event happened?
In high-profile cases, it actually happens with some regularity. It doesn't. I think it happens more at the state level. Typically, you don't see a lot of change of venue cases in the federal courts, but I think in the state, I think that happens more regularly. And again, I think, really, it comes down to whether or not the defendant's going to get an opportunity to have a fair trial. And the tensions were high in Springfield, justifiably so. But given the temperature that this case had a tendency to generate, again, I'm not surprised that the judge felt that it was appropriate to go to Peoria. He could look out the courtroom doors. He can look out the windows. He can see he can watch the local news. He could see what was going on, and probably made a determination that moving it out of Sangamon was the right call. And again, doesn't happen a lot, but it's not rare.
All right, Chris O'Talling, thank you so much for joining us with your analysis on what has been taking place today. We are going to take a break right about now, but we will be back on the stream as soon as we hear from family members, from Sonya Massey's family members, possibly Sean Grayson's family members, following the verdict of the second-degree murder verdict of Sean Grayson down in Peoria this afternoon. We'll